Hello, welcome to the F2 show. I'm your host, Fraser Ford, and I'm joined today by Inside F2 editor, LA Wilshaw, Inside F2 writer, Lawrence Griffin, and GP Grandstand's Jim Kimberley. Coming up on the show, we review all of the drama from a frantic weekend of Formula 2 action. We look at how this weekend's results impact on the championship standings. And finally, as always, we answer your questions from this weekend. So much to talk about, so we're going to try and rattle through as much as we can. But, you know, it was a classic Formula 2 weekend, wasn't it? Action everywhere you looked, Jim.
Yeah, really good to have it back. And it really delivered from the very first race, which I think we should probably call the tale of the front wings. I don't know how many drivers lost their front wings in that race, but really entertaining. Piastri from the off looking quicker. I know Schwartzman tried to outmuscle him a little bit and maybe intimidate him in that first race. But throughout the weekend, Piastri just looked like he was on a bit of a different level. And the feature race in particular, I really enjoyed seeing the gamble in particular by Mr. Dan Ticktum by not coming in, waiting for some sort of incident, and based on the other two races, that was going to happen, wasn't it? And sure enough, came in at the right time. Lundgaard came in just before, bit unfortunate for him. But yeah, I was absolutely devastated that a safety car had to come out for those last two laps, because that feature race was going to be an absolute dynamite finale. So 3 great races in the feature race, capping it off, but just a bit subdued right at the end. But safety cars, once again, Formula 2, the story of the weekend.
It really was, wasn't it? And Jim, you know, there was a lot of, you mentioned it there in sprint race 1, there was a lot of impact there, or incidents, and there was a few front wings that were lying about on the track, weren't there? Do you think that is, you know, because of the gap, if you like, in between from the last race?
It was speculated, wasn't it? The commentators mentioned that some of the drivers might be a little bit rusty, and I think we won't know properly until the end of this season, when we're going to Saudi Arabia to see how they're behaving there on a brand new track, street circuit, and with another 2-ish month gap. So it's entirely possible, isn't it? It's not a circuit that I'm expecting to see as many incidents as we did see. There was just so many front wings getting clipped and contact between the drivers that it's at a level now. They're not Formula 3, they're not Formula Regional, they're Formula 2. They've been doing this for a good many years, even if not at Formula 2 level. I wouldn't expect to see as much damage as we did. And the first race in particular was the crash fest. So yeah, it's a plausible explanation, but I don't think we can conclusively say it. It might just have been one of those races, as Formula 2 can so often give us. But yeah, I can buy into the idea that rustiness did play a big part this time round.
Yeah, and LA, obviously great to have you with us again. I suppose the main talking point of the weekend is probably Oscar Piastri. Pretty good for a rookie, Mark Webber said, didn't he? But my word, did he have to work hard for the races that he, you know, I mean, definitely the feature race win this morning. He had to work hard for it, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he sort of started the weekend off quite well, because, you know, even in his qualifying and practice, you know, he was fifth fastest in practice, and then he qualified in Q1 first and Q2 first and Q3 first. So he was sort of leading the pack throughout the weekend. And, you know, then he got the 4th and the 7th, and then his win. But he did sort of describe, you know, the pressure, really, you know, especially when he was leading in the race from behind, because you have no tow, you have no slipstream, and everybody else is obviously, you know, getting off each other's slipstreams, and the amount of overtakes that went on anyway, and yes, the incidents and accidents of coming together. I think this is the most enjoyable F2 weekend I've seen since I've been watching F2, and I was thrilled by every single race. And of course, Oscar totally delivered. He totally showed, you know, that his other championships are, you know, why he's earned them, why he's won them, and he's definitely on course to winning this in his rookie season.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant action all weekend long. And Lawrence, we saw, you know, Piastri going wheel to wheel with Schwartzman in sprint race 1, as Jim's alluded to, with Zhou in the feature race. He's certainly not worried about going wheel to wheel, is he? You would have thought that a championship, or someone that's leading the championship, might have that in the back of their minds, but he didn't at all, did he? He was going wheel to wheel. They were all fair battles as well, right?
Not at all. I mean, he has no fear. It was unbelievable the sort of moves that he was going for anybody on the grid, let alone somebody who's got his position in the championship. And it was really tight, wasn't it, in the very first race of the weekend, between himself and his teammate. Schwartzman reacting a little bit quicker to the virtual safety car restart, and shepherding him into the gravel, really losing a lot of momentum in the process. And it's interesting that those two sort of had a bit of a coming together very close between them in the very first race of the season back in Bahrain. So neither of them are going to shy away from racing each other. And even throughout the first race this weekend, he made a wonderful move around the outside of Daruvalla at the Della Roggia chicane. So he really does seem to be absolutely fearless and to make fair moves and clean moves at the same time, which is really quite a technique. And back into the Della Roggia chicane in the feature race on Guan Yu Zhou, almost showing the difference in styles between himself and Zhou. Zhou really did seem to back off in places in that move with Piastri, really being mindful of the championship situation, whereas Piastri just went full send. And at times that really worked well for him, in that he was able to jump ahead of cars, move up the field when people did get stuck a little bit in the DRS trains at times. And then you have Zhou's attitude, which was to back off and wait for the pressure to tell, which it did on Yuri Vips in the first sprint race. So it was really just interesting to see that comparison between their approaches, and it'll be interesting to see if they come together again, if Zhou's going to be a bit mindful of that, maybe try to show that he's not as much of a pushover as Piastri thinks. But yeah, looking forward to more battles from them and more excellent Piastri overtakes.
Yeah, because they seem to be glued together all weekend long, didn't they? In sprint race 1, and then sprint race 2, wasn't it? And then the feature race, they seem to be always together. But in terms of the championship fight, Jim, Guan Yu Zhou, he's been beaten by Oscar Piastri in the feature race. He's been beaten by Théo Pourchaire, who's a star of the weekend, by the way. We'll talk about him shortly. Do you think Guan Yu Zhou, the fact that he has been beaten by those guys, will that impact his Formula One chances, or do you think that doesn't really have an impact at all?
It's like we spoke about last time out, talking about the calendar, the unfortunate nature of the calendar this year, that in any other season, probably not, because round 5 wouldn't be happening so late into the season, where the silly season's well underway in Formula One. This time around, I don't know. It's difficult to say. That Mark Webber's comments about not bad for a rookie, totally right. But I wonder if Zhou's actually showing that level of maturity that Piastri is still getting himself by being a little bit more reserved. I don't think it's a stupid thing to do, because any of those full sends, which is the correct term, Lawrence, that would have gone wrong could completely derail a championship. That could be a DNF, and instead Zhou's looking at 2 podium finishes this time out, 2 bits of silverware, decent haul of points, and he's still well within clinching first place for the championship. So in terms of a Formula One seat, difficult to say, especially with Giovinazzi having a half decent weekend until lap 1. But yeah, I don't know. I imagine that Zhou is quite glad that Sochi's just around the corner to have another shot at it. But at the end of the day, in all likelihood, Piastri's not going for a Formula One seat next year, is he? So I don't know if it's going to particularly impact him. He's still the best option that Alpha might have in Formula 2 for realistic options. So I don't know. I think Zhou drove maturely. Piastri drove fast and fearless, but I think Zhou, now so well versed in Formula 2, might have a bit of that fear, and that might not be a bad thing.
And are we getting to the point where the season where you're probably looking at Piastri, Zhou, and potentially Schwartzman being the championship contenders, or are we still wide open? Ticktum, Vips, for example, or Théo Pourchaire, are they still winning with a chance?
If anybody but Zhou or Piastri, or in particular Piastri at this point, wins a championship, I'll be amazed, personally. I don't discount any of those guys. I don't know how quickly Formula 2 can change, especially with a 3 race per weekend format. But I think at this point, if you're Mia Scherisman in the Alpine Academy, you'll be absolutely delighted with how the championship's going, because one of your 2 drivers, 2 of the 3, is a dead cert for winning at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about the feature race then. Dan Ticktum obviously had the safety car come out. How far could he have gone, Lawrence? Could he have been fighting for the win?
I think he probably could have. It was such an exciting spectacle, wasn't it, to see him charging through the field on those new soft tyres. I think he came out maybe P11. And it's rare, we hear drivers talking about their grip levels in the cars. It's rare that you can actually see from the body language of the car just how much more grip somebody has. And he looked like he was in a different formula to the people around him. And I'm just so gutted we got deprived of that action, because the way that he was driving, just scything through the field, I think any of the drivers in front of him would have really struggled to actually hold him off, as much as those drivers are obviously going to want to defend their positions in the last race of the weekend, maximize those points haul, especially in the feature race. I just don't see how they could have stopped him. You could be wrong if you watched the Formula One today. You saw how fast Valtteri Bottas was on new tyres, and he burnt them pretty quickly and then got stuck. So there's no saying that couldn't have happened to Dan Ticktum. I think the way he was going, he still would have been quite a short stint on those tyres. I think he could have. I think he was odds on for the win at the point at which that safety car came out. So absolutely gutted for him.
Yeah, Dan was actually saying a little bit earlier in the press conference that he was being a little bit conservative on those tyres, knowing that he would need them to the absolute last lap, to try and get the win. So he wouldn't really have burnt them off. He thinks that he definitely had another 3 or 4 laps left of them in them, but he was confident he would get P2. He still wasn't certain about the win, but I'm sure Dan Ticktum being Dan Ticktum, he would have still have given it his all, and even a bit of pressure. We saw that in the second sprint race, a little bit of pressure there, from the driver behind, and one driver pops off at that chicane, and has to take that escape road and has to give the place back. But yeah, Dan did really well today. So, but yeah, that was his tyre situation.
Yeah, so unfortunate for Dan Ticktum, because he really was looking good, wasn't he? Obviously, the cause of that safety car was that Bent Viscouw and David Beckman coming together. Beckman's actually been given a 5-place grid drop, if you haven't seen that already, on our social media channels for the next race because of that incident. Richard Verschoor, he was unfortunately disqualified at the end of the race for being below the minimum weight requirement. So really unlucky for him, because that was a really strong end to a good weekend for him. But I'm sure he'll bounce back in Sochi. Let's talk about Sprint Race 1 winner then, and one of the stars of the weekend, as we've already said, Théo Pourchaire. If he is going to be in contention for the Alfa Romeo seat, LA, this was the perfect weekend for him to have a weekend like he has, right?
Yeah, he had a bit of an up and down weekend, really, from my point of view. I'm not sure he's in contention for the Alfa Romeo seat. I think there might be. Well, it's nothing I know. I'm not a fly on the wall, and I'm not in anybody's meeting rooms or anything with pens in my hand. But it may very well be Joe's seat. I'm not going to say already, but it may be Joe's seat. And I think any of the other drivers that might have been in contention for it, including Giovinazzi, it's. I think we'll see another graduate in Formula One next season anyway.
I don't think it'd be the worst thing, if it wasn't Pourchaire's season next year. He's a young kid still. And there was that example we were speaking earlier with Joe, weren't we, that he scared Vips off the road, and he did the same with Pourchaire at one point, I think in second race. And I don't know if that's that maturity that I mentioned that Joe might have on some of the drivers, that he's not going to go absolutely guns a-blazing to get the win. He's just going to get the points because, take a shot, everybody listening, consistency is key. That if Pourchaire is going to get scared off the road and not be consistent, that's maybe not going to lend himself to getting the Formula One seat, but he's clearly got a talent, and I don't think there's any rush for him to get the seat next year, when 2023 could be his Formula One season after a 2022 campaign in a even more maturity, even more talent, and potentially a upgrade of car. Not to dismiss ART's car or anything, but who knows what his seat could be next year. I think he's a real strong almost certainty to be a real championship contender from the off in 2022 in Formula 2.
Yeah, sorry, I agree with the maturity, because even Robert Schwartzman mentioned that about him still not being any harm in him having another Formula 2 season next season, you know, because he still has a lot to learn about Formula 1. And I think that's incredible, really, to not just think, yeah, I'm going to Formula 1 and everything's great, you know, and I'm the best driver in the world. You know, I believe that drivers do need to have a bit of a masterclass. And so Robert has been very mature this weekend, you know, about his view on not being in contention for Formula 1 seat at the moment, despite his amazing start as a rookie last year. So yeah, it'd be good for the others to also kind of realize that. And you know, because Formula 2 is very different, and you could have luck on your side, you could just have a fantastic team and car. And I do think that the drivers, you know, wheel to wheel, need to show consistency and need to show that they're mature enough to get into a Formula 1 seat, because that's an incredibly different story altogether.
We forget how young some of these guys are, don't we? And, you know, the picture of Theo Pourchaire, who I was not so long ago on his Instagram, and he's just finished in school, and it's like, oh, like, you know, these guys are really young and they're still learning, aren't they? So they do still have plenty of time. Something I wanted to talk about, Jim, and actually we've had a question from a fan around this as well. So we saw quite a few mechanical issues this weekend, and it's not the first time we've seen it this season. Ian Hack on Twitter asked, are there too many technical issues kind of occurring at the moment? I mean, these guys are paying a lot of money for these seats, right? Do you pay all that money and then expect to have a technical issue every now and again?
Yeah, I don't know where the fault lies with it, to be honest. I suspect it's not going to be the fit of the teams, because it's not exactly like a certain team are having consistent issues, although High Tech have had plenty of issues, including mechanical and then steward issues and everything else. They've had a really rough year, haven't they? Yeah, it's unacceptable, to be fair, especially so far into the period we are now with the homologation of these types of cars. If this is like the first year, remember back in, was it 2014, when all the Formula 1 cars were kind of just blowing up all the time because it's this brand new formula? At that point, I was thinking, yeah, this is just the bedding in period. That's not the same with Formula 2 now. These are not cars which are brand new, with brand new engines and brand new chassis. The wheels aside, there's nothing that should be going wrong at this point in their life. So yeah, I'd be asking major questions. And if you look at, say, Christian Lundgaard, and maybe it's a bit of Renault's money that's helping him, he's not exactly had the best of seasons, and a lot of that hasn't necessarily been him and being slow, because he's not. I think he showed this weekend that he's not. You'd be saying, hold on a second, why am I paying this money, or why is somebody paying this money? Why am I not going to get my chance to take it into Formula 1 or beyond? Because of these issues, I'm not going to have a chance to show how good I am. So I'd be a bit peeved off. It's like paying for a first class ticket on a plane and then saying there's no seats available. You'd be a bit peeved, wouldn't you? So yeah, I think the question should be asked, and I don't know what you can really do. You can't take points off other people. I don't really want to go back to the dark old days where we used to have the best 6 results of 10 races or something like that, dropping points to make it fair, because we should be striving for some sort of longevity in these cars for eco reasons and everything else. So something has to be done, and I don't know if that's penalizing manufacturers, Dallara, or something else. But yeah, the questions have to be asked, and maybe that's something to be discussed in the off season, because it has got a bit ridiculous this year, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about some drivers that we don't necessarily talk about week in, week out on the show. And obviously we'd love to, of course we would, but we just don't have time for it, unfortunately. Let's start with Larim Zendelli, Lawrence. Probably his strongest weekend in Formula 2 so far. Would you agree?
I think so. I think he had a really thoroughly good weekend. Very unlucky, mind, but in terms of his performance, especially in the first sprint race, he was running in 5th place at one point. He capitalized on all the chaos that was going around him. And, you know, we've spoken about how incident packed the race was after a bit of a break. Monza having, one of the biggest braking zones, if not the biggest braking zone on the calendar, having to deal with safety car restarts, trying to get that temperature back into the tyres for that huge braking point. He dealt with that really quite well, where others around him were really struggling, and really strong moves throughout, and good pace. And previously we've spoken about Richard Verschoor and, been singing his praises. And one of the things we've said is how comfortably he's been ahead of Zindelli so far this season, but it really seemed to be the other way around, especially in that first race. I think he might have got in a bit of trouble for leaving his car in gear after he parked it. So the marshals struggled to move it. But that's really the only blot on his record, on a weekend in which he qualified 11th, which is probably about what you'd expect, if not maybe slightly above what you'd expect from that MP Motorsport car. And then a 7th position in the feature race after his teammate's disqualification. So I think a really strong weekend all round for him, and he'll hope to carry that momentum forward after what's been a really quite a quiet season for him so far. So nice to see a driver like that on the up.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? And LA, same for Bent Viscount. We got his first podium in Formula 2 this weekend.
Yeah, he did. I'm really pleased for him. I really like the guy. He got himself a couple of podiums last season in Formula 3, and he was actually quite close this year in Baku. He got a P4, which is great for Baku because it's such a tricky circuit, such a difficult circuit. And I kind of think that circuits like that do actually show who's a great sort of technician in the car. So he obviously has that kind of a mind. And it was lovely to speak with him in the press conference and get his views and opinions of his own performances. And he's very confident about the team. He's very confident about the car. I think they've only had 1 or 2, maybe 1-2 retirements this season with Marina Sato, but he knows the qualifying pace needs to pick up, and that's what the team are working on. If they can get their qualifying pace up, he's incredibly confident that the team can be making podiums and some race wins as well. And the way he was speaking, it kind of sounded like he was very settled, very nicely in the team, as if he wanted to maybe be a leader and want to take the team into the next phase for them. But they obviously are working very hard at Trident, and it's a good home weekend for them. He said it was a double home win, for him as well, whereas a lot of fans there for him, which was good. But yeah, how great for him. I mean, he did qualify 18th, which was quite far down, and today he got a P15, which still isn't bad. It's 3 places, and he finished a race in such a scrappy race today. But sprint race 1, he finished 7th. That's quite handy. And of course he got the 2nd place, and he deserved that 2nd place because of the amount of pressure that he put on the car in front, and eventually he got the place that he deserved. So yeah, well done, Ben. I'm championing you all the way.
Yeah, great weekend for Bent Viscount. And Jim, Jehan Daruvalla, a win this weekend and a really strong weekend, right?
Yeah, I was very happy to see him win after last year around the same point in the season, I think, as in Monza. That was when his season started to turn around a little bit, right? So could be lightning striking twice potentially, and boy does he need his season to step up a gear. I don't know who Red Bull might be looking at in the future, but I don't think he's going to be the top of the list at the moment for reasons beyond Yuki Tsunoda taking the seat already next year, so nowhere to go. I think we've spoken before about Formula 2 drivers having not many entry opportunities in Formula 1 next year, and Daruvalla is firmly amongst that. But yeah, it was not easy necessarily to lead from the front as he did in that 2nd race, but once he was there, he was never challenged, was he? I was a bit more concerned how his weekend might go when he was falling back repeatedly in the 1st race, but he seemed to address that a little bit more come sprint race 2. So yeah, I've been encouraged by him. Consistency, he's picked up a lot of points, just looking through his performances so far, because he had that great start back at Bahrain with 2nd place and another podium. So it's his first win for the season. he'll be mighty relieved at that. I don't know if he's going to be a championship challenger here on out. It's not necessarily going to be something that's going to completely turn around his season, and he's not going to be chasing Joe and Piastri up at the top. But if he could nab third place, he might turn some heads. But yeah, I think it's just what he needed, in particular this year after Tsunoda, not necessarily thoroughly, but did best him last year. And Ticktum's doing a little bit of the same this year. You know, Ticktum arrives on his turf and then starts banging his chest a little bit, saying, look how quick I am. That Daruvalla does need to show that he's not going to be walked over. So yeah, absolutely necessary, and hopefully gives him the confidence he needs for the rest of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really happy for Johan. And our debutants as well, Enzo Fittipaldi, JQ, shout out to them because they had a really strong opening weekend, or not necessarily an opening weekend for JQs, but yeah, really good weekend. Enzo Fittipaldi in particular would have been in the points today if he didn't get that 5-second penalty. And also a double overtake on Deleda and Drugovic, I think it was. So that was a really good move. I like that. So good for them. Now, I'm going to talk really quickly, guys, just about something we put on our socials this afternoon, which was around a 20 race calendar. Obviously, there's been a little bit of chat about the calendar and how the calendar maybe, you know, has or hasn't been as good as last season, some comparisons. 64% of our voters like the idea of a 20 races a season. LA, what do you think?
I voted in that because I just said yes, you know, because just races are races. Let's have loads of races. I don't think it will work having 3 races per weekend though. I don't think that's going to work out. So if there's a scope to maybe look at not necessarily having 2 sprint races, you know, it would be very nice to spread them back out again, but I have no idea how that would work with Formula 3 and W Series. Those are logistics that I have absolutely nothing to do with, sitting in my house in Lancashire, and I'm not in the Formula 2 management. But yeah, I mean, it's motor racing, isn't it? And what I do feel that at this moment in time, and it's something that the drivers spoke about, is that pretty much all those Formula 1 seats are settled and decided. And for the Formula 2 guys to not be able to have not saying the championship decided, because most seasons it's decided in the final weekend, right? But to you know, have drivers be able to stamp their authority on Formula 2, whether they become first or second, you know, in the championship. They've not been able to do that this season, and they've not been really able to show who they are, what they can do, because there has been so many breaks between. But you know, if they want to keep this format, the 2 sprint races and the feature race, then maybe, you know, the idea could be that it gets done a little bit earlier, like Formula 3, you know, switch it all around and you know, have the Formula 2 a little bit earlier, so then at least, you know, the guys can be looked at, because at the end of the day it's the Formula 2 guys that are going up into Formula 1, it isn't the Formula 3 guys. So I think the bit of priority put onto Formula 2, let the drivers have some momentum. You know, a lot of the drivers have been going off and doing lots of other things, and you know, a drive over at Indy or a drive in, you know, a different country, different series, and I don't think that that's good. You know, I think that they should be, to train and to get themselves into Formula 1 driver mode, they need to be consistently going in and out of the race weekends in their Formula 2 car. So if that means 20 races, then bring it on.
Lawrence, if we were to stick to the format that we currently have, at Sean X Williams 97 on Twitter asked, do you think 2 feature races and 1 sprint race would maybe cause, you know, it gives the drivers a bit more opportunity to showcase themselves, a bit extra pit stop, bit of time management as well? Do you think that would work better or not?
I think potentially. I think the current way in which it works with the 2 sprint races does mean you have quite a lot of short, sharp, snappy action, although the feature race itself isn't that much longer. It only seems longer because of the mandatory pit stop. I think the real difficulty that I think needs to be addressed is the way that the grids are done, in terms of if you get caught up in an incident in the first sprint race, then that's your second sprint race all but written off, bar, you know, Lungard-esque 19th to P3 performances, which at some tracks just isn't going to happen, even as unpredictable as Formula 2 is. So I think that's something that does need to be addressed, because the drivers, like LA says, they want to be able to showcase themselves and they want to get into a rhythm, and their weekend being written off after the first race is really not a positive thing for them in terms of their rhythm or in terms of how they advertise themselves. So I think maybe potentially something like last season's one feature race, one sprint race, weekends more consistently distributed throughout the calendar might be beneficial. But you have to look at the reasons why this change was made in the first place. And of course, financially, for the teams, it makes a lot of sense. What we really want is for the financial barriers to motorsport to be reduced. We want as many drivers, not having to think about the financial aspect, and you want the teams to not have to think about that as well. You want the teams throughout the whole grid to be able to have the funds to set up the car as best you can each weekend, so that you get the most even sort of field, especially when there are young drivers trying to prove themselves. They shouldn't, have a slight handicap from being in a less well set up car compared to the likes of you and I, Virtuosi or a Prema. So I think that we've got to remember why this happening. 2 feature races could be really interesting. It depends on how the reverse grid setup is, but it's definitely something that can be looked into within the parameters of what is financially viable for the teams, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what they decide to do next season. Obviously, we know they're having talks about it, so let's wait and see. And guys, that's all we have time for today. So Jim, LA, Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. And thank you to you guys at home for listening as well. If you've enjoyed the show, please make sure you give us a like, and make sure you let us know what you thought with the show in the comments section, and subscribe, of course, for more exclusive interviews, track guides, and more, of course, of the F2 show. We'll be back for more frantic Formula 2 action in a couple of weeks' time in Sochi. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.